everyone. In today's episode, I am so honored to have Eric Elias here with us. He is a school psychologist in Central Connecticut. He is Connecticut's 2018 School Psychologist of the Year and is beginning his 34th year of practice. He is the co host of the very successful podcast School Psyched. He has contributed numerous articles for his state association newsletter and has been published in the NASP Communique and several professional journals. He supports the practice of school psychology on a national level through his involvement in NASP. He is currently the president of the Connecticut Association of School Psychologists, a fellow CASP, right? We both have the CASP going on there.
Yes.
He teaches as an adjunct and is currently on the advisory board for the school psychology program at Southern Connecticut State University. He is passionate about social and emotional learning, social justice, as well as evidence-based assessment, practice, and interventions. I'm so honored to have you here, Eric. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. So it's mutual.
As we were talking about beforehand, you're used to being the one asking all the questions,
That's
so
right.
a little bit
Yeah,
different here.
it is
Well,
and a little nervous. So it's exciting.
Well, we are starting off with really important questions over here. Everyone always wants to know, what is everyone watching on TV? What is your favorite TV show you're watching right now?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I'm a little nerdy, and I will say I'm not a typical true crime person,
Mhm.
but I've gotten into Only Murders in the Building, which I think, just makes such a lovely, lighthearted approach to the true crime genre. And it's off season right now, but my wife and I have just fallen in love with that show, the zaniness and the great writing and the funniness, as well as the intrigue and the mystery.
And the
Um,
fact that they're podcasting all the way through it.
Yes, exactly, right. It's such a great connection. So that would be probably my favorite show lately. And then just recently, on a similar vein, which again, I say I'm not a true crime person, but a show called Death and Other Details, which is a really interesting sort of mystery
Okay.
that has a crime solver, an investigator as the lead person, and it's sort of this in vivo true crime unfolding as he narrates what it's like to investigate true crime. So it's a good drama. I think it's on Hulu, but I can't remember.
Well, we'll make sure in the show notes to get these very important details
Yes.
in. So, yes, yes. Awesome, awesome. Well, in one sentence, how would you think your colleagues describe you as a school psychologist?
Oh my gosh, I have there's a funny, slightly embarrassing term that goes around my school district, and my colleagues call me the Jesus of school psychology, which
Okay.
I am absolutely not. But that's sort of the admirational joke. They sort of tease me, but it's done in an admiring kind of way. Because they see me as someone who's knowledgeable, and I'm the senior school psychologist, the more experienced in terms of years. But it's such a term of endearment, and I sort of you know lower my head in embarrassment when they do it because they announce it sometimes at
Oh my
meetings
goodness.
or like, oh, it's the Jesus of school psychology. And I so appreciate the affection because we have a wonderful team in my school district, and I'm flattered that they see me as knowledgeable and supportive. I think that's a big part of my role, and I think they see me as always willing to reach out and support.
That can be a lot of, I don't know, concern. Like, are you supposed to know the answer to everything? Are you all
Right.
knowledgeable, right?
Right. I get all the phone calls. I happily try to answer and search for the answers with them, but I don't know everything.
Well, as I shared in your intro, you're in your 34th year as a school psychologist. At what point in your journey did you become involved in your state association?
Yeah, it's so amazing to look back on that and think 34 years have gone by quickly. I don't feel like I'm in my 34th year. I feel like I'm in maybe my 15th or 18th or something. And so I look at that number and go, wow, I'm close to retirement. Not sure when that'll happen, not
Mhm.
anytime immediately, but I can start planning for that, and I'm slightly overwhelmed by that thought. But I have always been a member of my state association. So I worked my first 6 years in New York State, where I'm
Mhm.
from originally, and joined the New York State Association. And of course, New York State is huge compared to Connecticut, and certainly California is
Right.
huge as well. And we had chapters in New York. So I was in the Rochester, New York area, sort of Western New York, and it was a mini association in and of itself. And I've loved being involved. I've always enjoyed just participating in the state association work. And the same when we moved to Connecticut in 1996, I was in my finished my sixth year of practice and starting my seventh year here, and I joined the state association. And a couple of my colleagues were fairly heavily involved, and I just kind of jumped in. At that point, my wife was a graduate student, and I had some time on my hands. And then we started having kids, and I had no time on my hands. So I maintained membership, but I would say didn't really start getting involved in leadership until my kids were like junior high age. So probably 10 years ago or so.
Okay. Well, and as a state association leader right now, what are some of your key initiatives? Like, what are you passionate about working on?
Hmm. I think something, the shortages, of course, are huge for many states in Connecticut. We have fewer school psychs than we need. So that's probably our big priority is not only trying to figure out how to address the shortages, but also trying to figure out uh, not just filling positions, I guess, but trying to figure out what may be going on systemically in education that may be keeping folks from entering the field of school psychology, or maybe encouraging folks to leave the field prematurely.
Yeah.
And so I think a big part of our initiative is looking at equity and diversity and trying to figure out perhaps why our field isn't as diverse as it should be or as we'd like it to be. Why does our field not always reflect the population of students we're working with in terms of diversity and so I think a big part of what we want to do is figure out why or what we need to do as a system to reflect the diversity of our population within the field. And I think part of that for us in Connecticut is um, not having paid internships. I think, we sort of looked at what's going on in the field, what's going on in our state. And of course, this is just one issue. I think making sure people in leadership people who are in leadership reflect diversity, that everyone is invited to the table, everyone has a stake in decision
Mhm.
making, that it's not just folks who look like me who are running the show and
Right.
centered in the field or in the process. But I think we took a hard look at uh, and we're given some feedback. Folks leave the state when they need to do their internship, and there are lots of states who pay a salary,
Mm,
and we don't have paid internships. And a lot of us are feeling like that's a huge barrier to folks who perhaps come from lower socio and economic backgrounds in the field, perhaps folks from minoritized communities in the field. And so, who can do a full practicum year and then a full internship year for free?
right.
Give up 2 years of their lives and not have any income, or have to work, in the evenings
Another
or
job. Right.
yeah, another job. So that's been a big push of ours to investigate and try to see if we can push some legislation that will allow our State Department of Ed to look at whether or not they can help us fund this kind of thing. Of course, most school districts are not able to shovel out, four salaries for a bunch of new interns to come in.
Right.
So we're trying to figure out what might be some funding sources and what other states are doing. But I'm definitely passionate about that and wanting to see us see if we can push some legislation that will impact or change that part of our field.
I think that's an incredible idea to go to the state legislation because, like you said, the first thought would be just talking with school districts, like, hey guys, we should start paying. But as you mentioned, it's not like they have any of this funding. So what a great idea to try and figure out at the state level, can we have some funding here to really
Yeah.
keep these people, because we know once you're in that internship, a lot of people get hired in that school district.
Right. Yes. Yeah. We do something interesting in the state of Connecticut that allows the internship year to be your first year of hire in an area of shortage.
Oh,
So they call it certified with a deficiency. So you would need to be, let's say a school district has three school psych positions open and nobody's applied because of the shortage.
yeah.
uh, they can, if we are a shortage area according to the state, they can hire an intern in their first year, but they're required to provide a high level of supervision. So they
Right.
need a particular amount of supervision. So your internship year could actually be your first year of hire if the school
Interesting.
district are willing to do it. My only fear about that is that people will be left on their own as if they were a first year school psych and not be given the supervision that an intern requires and should be getting.
Yeah. I remember when I was an intern, not 34, but over 20 years ago, like I had my own school and I remember being like dropped off on my first day, like, this
Yes.
is your school. Call me if you have any questions. And I'm like,
Right.
that's my supervision. Okay.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Versus, there's such variety in how much supervision you are receiving. And it's surprising to
Yes.
me sometimes how often we just are providing, this is your school. Give me a call if you have any questions.
Right. Right. Yeah. And thinking about all the responsibilities of new school sites
Mm.
in this society and this level of intensity with mental health needs and
Right.
wow, I can't imagine leaving somebody on their own to figure it out.
No, and I think about this even for our newer school psychologist, your principal doesn't really care if you're an intern or a first year or
Right.
in your 34th year. Like we still need to fulfill all these roles. It's not like a
Yes.
principal will ever say, "Oh, you're new? Oh, I'll go ask someone else." Like
Right. Right.
that level of need from the school doesn't change just because we're newer to the field.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. You have a job that you were hired to do. Figure it out.
Figure it out. Right.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a specific accomplishment in your role as state association president that you're most proud of right now?
I would say yes. I would say uh, collegiality, networking and collegiality, and I can't take credit for this, but we have through our State Department of Ed and through one of our local educational associations, we have these regional associations in Connecticut that are in New York, they're called BOCES, Board of Regional Educational Cooperative Educational Services, and they're sort of like a county run agency that can provide support for school districts. They often run special ed programs in schools. In Connecticut, we call them RESCs, and they're a regional area cooperative educational association. I think we have six or eight in the state of Connecticut. And through one of our RESC associations and the State Department of Ed, during the pandemic, we began this series of communities of practice.
Mm.
And there was one for school psychologists, one for speech language paths, one for OTs, social workers, et cetera. And it was a way for the state association or the State Department of Ed to really allow us to network better, to allow us to discuss issues of evaluation and supervision, to provide self-directed training.
Mm.
And so it was really important during the pandemic because it allowed 100 of us at a time to get on a Zoom meeting and really
Right.
connect. And our RESC, Dr. Christine Peck, who is running this right now, has continued it, and we're the only group that's continued since the pandemic supposedly has
Oh,
gone away.
right.
Um, and so she continues to help run this. It's not sponsored by our state association, but it's sanctioned by the Department of Ed, and I'm just super proud just to participate in it. We've continued biweekly meetings for I guess 4 years now, and
Wow.
looks like will continue next year. And it's amazing. Sometimes it's a guest speaker and some training. Sometimes it's talking with a rep from the State Department of Ed about supervision and evaluation for specialist area service providers. And it's, to me, it's a breath of fresh air every 2 weeks and really allows us to talk very specifically about areas in the field that we need to continue to iron out. And so I'm proud as the state association to just be a part of it. So it's something I'm grateful for.
Well, it's incredible because I know some of the feedback we get from so many people in our field is that they feel very lonely, right? They're the only
Yes.
person at their school site in this role. And so, what a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk with other people, know exactly what everyone's going through,
Yeah.
and come up with ideas, and just to have that opportunity to ask some questions. Or, I think about when I provide trainings, I'm always like, I'm not going to stand up here and talk at you for 6 hours. You have to talk
Right.
with one another.
Yes.
And it's always that moment of like, is this what you do? Am I doing this right? Right? Like, what do you
Yes.
guys do in
Yes.
your school? All of those opportunities
Yeah.
that most of the time we don't get to have.
Yeah. We see that we're not alone. And and perhaps, I might have had that imposter syndrome or the thought that I'm doing something wrong, or and you can just spill the beans and let it out, and and often get reinforced and encouraged that, oh yeah, I'm not doing that wrong. Or
Right.
and I should say, I'm super proud of my team as well. We have just a wonderful small group of leaders in our state who have time right now to commit to the association, but
Mhm.
I'm very proud of everybody's input and their time and their just giving to the field of school psychology.
That's wonderful. Well, reflecting back 34 years ago when you were a first year school psychologist, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of finishing up that first year for themselves right now?
I love that question. It is one of these, looking back a long way in retrospect. And when I was in grad school in 1987, 88, finishing my internship in 1989, um, it was a different field. It was a different world. I only gave the WISC and the WJ. Those were the only two tests that I knew. And the WISC was the WISC R at the time. And it was, discrepancy model was all we did for looking at LD. And essentially, other than talking to a handful of kids in crisis from time to time, I just tested, and it was mostly LD. We didn't have all of the categories. I don't know if at least in New York, whether we had OHI, ADHD at the time. I don't think we did. Um, and so, trying to figure out, how do we do an ADHD assessment? Is that a doctor's job, a medical provider's job? Is it my role? So I think, looking back, I first piece of advice would be, you don't have to have all the answers. As the field evolves, we evolve,
Yeah.
and we should do our best to just keep up, really trying to stay aligned with best practices and trying to stay aligned with evidence-based work and research, and through NASP and the state association, we can connect with all of that,
Hmm.
and connect with great resources. I loved, especially back in my early years, a number of psychologists, school psychologists, and community practitioners who I would talk to about a case or a student, and they would, sort of say, anytime you have questions, we need to keep, each other, networking, and sort of take you under their wing, and say, anytime you want to talk about this stuff,
Yeah.
please, here's my number. So not being afraid to seek support and help, um, and not feeling like you have to have all the answers. I think it was a good 5 years before I felt like I knew what I was doing. Like, whoa, and everybody has the imposter syndrome, right? Um, and then burnout, I think, would be my other piece of advice, would be to really try to find life balance, try to find the things that motivate you, try to um, spend time with your loved ones, building resiliency, because the job is a tough job, and
Yeah.
it's easy to get discouraged or run down, or burned out. And making sure you find time for your friends, your family, yourself, and just enjoy the things that are out there for us to enjoy.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about, you don't need to know everything, but a lot of people do come to the school psychologist. We do have a lot of knowledge. We do have a lot of knowledge
Yes.
about students and the special education world. So a lot of times we are seen as a leader. So would you give any specific advice? Because I think about some of our school psychs who come into the field and they don't quite know that they're going to be put in that role. Right? They're like, "No, no, we're
Yeah.
team members." And I'm like, "Yes, we are team members, but a lot of people look to you for specific kind of knowledge." And so I think a lot of people aren't ready to kind of step into that role as being a leader. What
Yeah.
any suggestions or advice in that?
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. 100%, I 100% agree with you. Um, we probably get a little coddled in our internships, and and rightfully so. And and I hope that we are providing experiences that are helping our growing learning school psychs and interns into becoming fully independent. But sometimes it's like getting thrown into the fire, and you're like,
Yeah.
wait a second. There's lawyers at the door, there's advocates at the door. I don't think I did anything wrong, but I don't know what's going on here. And the principal has given me, a huge responsibility. So I think one of the things I do with my grad students at Southern Connecticut State University is we really talk about what the state criteria is for each area of disability. So, how does the state of Connecticut interpret IDEA? And I need to know when I go to a meeting, people are going to expect me to have a lot of decision making data, even though everybody provides some of that if we're
Right.
we're assessing as a team, but they're often expecting me to lead the discussion on what this looks like and where are we going with this. And so really helping them from the start, my first year students understand what's going to be expected of them in their role as database decision makers, and then what does the state require? So we have, our checklist for particular disability eligibility. We have state guidance documents for understanding particular disabilities, and really helping them know where those documents are, develop a precursor knowledge. Of course, we can't memorize all the disabilities and all
Right.
the documents, but really being aware that, oh, yeah, the intellectual disability guidelines are here on the state website. I actually know that page 34 is where it talks about eligibility. That is one that I share with my school psychs and my team very often. And so I'm very aware, and there's a checklist of things you need to go through and what data you're required to have. And so really being aware of that when you're going into the field. Most of what we're going to be doing will be assessment. A
Mhm.
large part of, what we'll do, we will of course be doing crisis work and counseling and IEP development and goal writing. But a good chunk of our time will be assessing for special education
Yeah.
disabilities in most school districts. So really being prepared for what we're going to be needed to be doing in database decision making, and being confident in that. There's nothing wrong with saying, "Let me look it up. I'm not sure." Um, but I want to be confident in, here's what I do know about this area of
Mhm.
disability, and not feel browbeaten. It can be really intimidating if you're in a room with lawyers and advocates,
Mhm.
and people are asking the hard questions. So we want to be prepared for those hard questions as frequently as possible.
Yeah. I always say to have some sort of nice go-to response when someone throws you
Yes.
a question that you're not
Yes.
quite certain about. And I think most recently I had an outside provider and we were on I was explaining our results, he was explaining his results, and then he was like, we both gave the same adaptive measure. Are we allowed to do that within the same time frame? And I was like, no one has ever asked me that question. And I said, I do not know that off the top of my head, but I
Yeah.
am very happy to look that up and I will get back to the team. But just in that moment, I'm just like, am I supposed to know this? Is my first
Right.
thought, right?
That's
But
a
then I'm like,
question
no,
no one's
no
ever
one's
asked.
I can give a response for an academic test, I can give a response for a WISC, but redoing an
Right.
adaptive scale, and that wasn't something I was ready for. But to have that go-to response
Yeah.
and not be, you know, have that moment where all of a sudden I'm stressed out or anything like that. I don't know it. Guess what? I don't know it.
Right. And that's
So, but I'll
okay.
get back to you. I know how to look it up.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Well, many school psychologists want to become more involved in leadership and state leadership, but it's really obviously a time commitment. How do you manage your time and make it work?
Um, Lots of deep breaths. um, uh, I would say uh, with my with my wife, checking the calendars. Who's got one of the kids when? Who's gonna drop off and pick up? Who's cooking dinner? So really managing the home schedule. If you're on
Yeah,
your own, then you have no one to be accountable to with your schedule. But really managing the home schedule. My wife similarly is a psychologist. She's a clinician and a professor of clinical psych, and we have three busy kids, one with special needs, and she is also in leadership in the Early Childhood Association for our state as well. And so figuring out, we really have to communicate and
yeah,
keep tabs on who's doing what when, and we make it work very well. But I would say, for probably the average person who hopefully isn't as overbooked as I am, um, you know, find as much time as you can give and let folks know. I don't expect anybody to bend over backwards and give, a full-time job's worth of time to our state association. I so appreciate whatever time people have to give, and I'm grateful for that. And so, we all know we're all volunteers in this, whether
right,
we're doing NASP stuff or our state association stuff. And I think we hopefully are giving each other grace in that, to know that, yeah, sometimes the time frame might get pushed back, or we might drop the ball on something. um, but we're all working together, we're all volunteers, and so we have whatever time is available is all I would want somebody to consider. Give what you can. And I think if you can step into a position of leadership with even just a few hours a week,
mhm,
that makes an amazing difference. And if we have 20 people do that, the adage of many hands make light work
right.
really goes a long way, rather than having four people do hours and hours and getting stressed. We recently had a couple of graduate students step in to do some work for us for social media, and they have been amazing. They know social media like I don't know social media. So, I love it. They're able to throw these little tweets and Instagram and Facebook things out, and they make posts that they throw across multiple, fields of social media. And they're on top of diversity messages and equity messages, and things that are important, Black History Month messages, and just things that, you know, perhaps I wouldn't have time to do on a regular basis or think about necessarily. And they're like, yeah, we're doing some diversity stuff at our university. There's a webinar, please join, and here are some things that you can do this week in honoring Black History Month. And here are some things to consider for Women's History Month. And just keeping us apprised. And I think they've mentioned that they're only doing this a couple hours a week, and they're pretty comfortable with it. And I'm amazed, because for me to take that on, the learning curve would just be so
Right.
steep. So, yeah, whatever you have time to do, and if you have time to do it with someone, and we have two
Mhm,
people doing some of this stuff, that's amazing.
yeah.
The more the merrier. So I would say, feel free to step in and test the waters. The water's warm. Come on in, and but step in. If you only can step into your ankles and work just a little bit and share your knowledge, and we grow together. And I love the adage which we use for School Psych podcast, but I got it from someone in California. It's none of us is as skilled as all of us. And I got that from some document that was shared with me from an association in California. And I have thought that's just perfect.
I love that. Yeah, that's wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share or promote about your state association?
come to Connecticut. We have job openings. We pay okay. We're not the top of the pile. We're nowhere near the bottom of the pile in terms of salary. We do have a number of school districts that are committed to lower student school psych ratios. We have a lot of school districts that are between 5 and 700 for
Wow.
your student ratio. And we are committed to supporting you and supporting best practices. And if you're an intern, we're working hard to see if we can get you a paycheck for your internship. Um, but I just want to say to you, like, I love what you're doing. And as I mentioned, I think before we were talking, I've been a follower of yours for a long time. And just the prepared school psychologist, being able to share your knowledge and experience and connecting with guests who can do the same to help support school psychologists at all levels. It's a tough job, and the more we connect with one another and the more we connect with folks who are sharing their knowledge freely, the better off we are. Um, so kudos to you and all that you're doing too, Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you. I love this field. I know how hard it is to be in this field, and it just seems to get harder and harder every year. And, we're not just given the Whiskar and the WJ anymore. So things are constantly changing. And so any opportunity for people to feel less alone and not have to spend too much time Google searching, to
Yeah,
try and find those quick resources, I'm very happy to provide that support. So it's something I love to do. Well,
awesome.
to switch gears a little bit, I know you have many areas of passion in this field, and one of them is school refusal support.
Yeah,
We've so many, it's a topic I hear about all the time.
yeah,
How do we help get these kids? It's not a new problem, but definitely after the pandemic and after all the school building closures, I think we still are having a lot of difficulties getting kids, to come back to school consistently. So, can you share more about this area of interest for yourself?
sure. Yeah, and I think stumbled across this, and it became an area of interest exactly through what you mentioned. Anxiety, school refusal hitting an all-time high during the pandemic, and so many kids needing some kind of intervention. And so I came across a book called "When Children Refuse School: A Cognitive Behavior Therapy Approach," and it's by Chris Kearney and Anne Marie Albano. And they seem to be, Chris Kearney in particular has been doing this for probably 20 some years, and I believe it was his topic of his dissertation.
Hmm.
And so he's written a number of books on this and seems to be one of the leading folks addressing school refusal in the field right now. And so I came across his book, their book, and then I came across a webinar and training that was using the book. And then I started applying it to what I was doing. And I thought, wow, this really makes sense. So essentially, the idea is that school refusal, happens across a continuum, like many phenomenon, and it, can go from acute to chronic. And we typically see the kids who, the maybe the separation anxiety with our young kids, or kids getting into middle school who start to become maybe possibly truant, um, and starting to figure like, oh, okay, what's going on. Oftentimes we're putting the interventions in after it's really solidified and become a
Right.
significant problem, and at that point it may be more difficult to address. So one of the thing that I really like about this approach is that if you do a school refusal FBA, you typically are going to find that kids fall into one of four categories, not unlike our normal FBAs that we would do. And then there are specific treatment ideas for each functional profile. And that to me made so much sense. And once we started figuring out where the kids sort of fell on the spectrum and where they, on the continuum, and where they might have fallen in terms of treatment model and functional profile, we were able to apply some treatment methodologies that seem to really work. And so I have a number of cases that seem to turn around fairly quickly, and they were hard cases. So it became sort of passionate, but also that sense of of success became contagious too, and other folks in the district said, "Wow, what's going on at your school? You've had some success with this." And then a couple of colleagues of mine and I presented at a conference, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, that was really good advice." So it kind of became contagious in terms of positive, sort of the ball rolling and continuing to be positive. And I think hopefully helping folks with some good suggestions and good recommendations. And so the four functional profiles really are key. And the typical one that I run into most is that the child has some sort of anxiety or depression, and it kind of has an internal presentation. This
Hmm.
is a kid who just is upset, anxious, not wanting to go to school, um, versus maybe an attachment or separation anxiety issue with a youngster, usually a youngster who is crying at the front door, and you separate them from mom or dad or a caregiver. They go into class and immediately they're fine. And they're like, "Oh yeah, school's okay." And then you build that habit over 3 or 4 weeks, and they're usually okay. And as long as in many of those cases, as long as the parents also are able to separate, we
Right.
have to sort of encourage them and support them in that. We usually have some success with the separation anxiety. Um, Another profile is kids who are fearful of something that's actually happening. So bullying. So not just the internalized anxiety and depression, but I'm afraid of taking tests. I'm afraid of changing my clothes in gym class. I'm fearful of the bully on the playground who
Right.
really is bullying me. So that more external anxiety producing event. And then the last area are kids who are pursuing tangibles, maybe a high schooler who's staying up all night playing video games with their buddies online and getting up and smoking weed, and they're more truant, as
Right.
sort of exercise behavior. And so the kids that I've really run into more have been the kids with that internalized presentation of anxiety and depression. And that to me is one where I think in schools we tend to under accommodate at times. We're just not sure why Tommy's crying, or why he won't come into school, and why he won't, get in the car when he's at home. And so when they're in school, typically, I think school personnel, we might be slightly impatient. Like if he's not going to go into the classroom, he's going to go to the office, right? And so it becomes this hard-lined disciplinary approach.
Hmm.
Um, but what we found, and we've had an amazing team, regular ed teachers, special ed teachers, parents, my administrator, myself, and the social worker in my building. We've really done some good teamwork on a number of cases, and also included outside providers at parents' request and permission, and have developed some plans for these kids. So we did things like exposure and response prevention. So the child won't come into the building. So on the weekend, mom and dad take the child to the school. The school's closed. There's no fear of having to enter the school. They walk up to the school, they touch the front door, they go back to the car. Or they go out back to the playground in the backyard and they play for 5 minutes
Yeah.
and then they go back to the car. So those kinds of things. And then trying to accommodate, if the kid won't come in, maybe we can start at the end of the day for a half hour and build the day longer. And so a couple of kids who have special ed IEPs, we've been able to provide some tutoring so that they're getting their education, but then they're coming into school for 45 minutes. And then in three
Okay.
weeks, increase it to an hour, and then an hour and a half, and then 3 hours. And we've had a lot of success within a month to 6 weeks, getting kids fully integrated back into the school with supports.
Hmm.
And every day is not perfect, but with I'd say three cases in particular recently, the children are entering the school, entering their class, and spending the entire day with
Wow.
some supports. So, from complete school refusal, where they had 3 weeks of not attending at all. So it's kind of exciting, and I just follow the treatment ideas, and I can share my notes with you if you have a spot to
Yeah.
have a little 4-page summary of the stuff I've learned from the book, and some ideas and treatment ideas. So
Yeah,
happy to
no, we'd
share
love to
that.
share that with our
Yeah. Oh,
listeners.
great.
Yeah, in our show notes, definitely.
Sure.
So you had mentioned, and I was recently at a training just the other week where the presenter was talking about like doing an FBA, and you used that word FBA there too. And I think for a lot of our school psychologists, it having your mind wrapped around like we do FBAs at school. Like this kid is
Yes.
like coming to
Yes.
school. Like, am I supposed to go to their house? Like, how do we like logistically do this? But I
Yeah.
love the way that you and in this book are breaking down the reasons behind. And that's what I know that I was sharing in a group that we were discussing that like, well, we kind of have to figure out why they're not coming to school. We don't want to
Yes.
assume that everyone's not coming to school for the same reason because obviously, like
Yes.
you mentioned, the treatment plan's going to be different. If
Yeah.
you're being bullied versus I have separation anxiety, but guess what? So does my mom. Right? Like all of
Right.
those instances are going to be a little bit different. So when you guys talk about an FBA in these kind of situations, are people going into the home or is it more through interviews and those types of pieces?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the little document that I'll share, I think if not, if I haven't put them in, I'll put them in. There's some hyperlinks to free interviews, anxiety interviews, school refusal FBA interview, and in some of those cases, in one case, our social worker and another professional went to the house and did an observation and interview with the parents.
Yeah.
And in the other cases, we did everything via Zoom and via paperwork, questionnaires on paper. And I think we were able to gather enough information. And having the outside service provider who also came into the school to observe, having them be there and share, here's what how the child presents in our office. That was sort of it gave some realistic impressions of how the child was functioning outside of school as well. So I would say, and of course, be careful, right? Some school districts have policies about not doing home visits and or
Right.
doing home visits with a team of
Yes.
people, and you know, always making sure that you're safe and that wherever you're going is, a safe place, and that the parents are comfortable having you within their home as well.
Right. Never, never do a home visit alone.
Yes,
Never, never.
right.
I'm curious because one of the things you were talking about is a lot of times by the time the school psychologist gets involved, it's not the beginning, right? It's the, hey, this kid hasn't been to school for 6 weeks,
Right.
right? And now we've got these behaviors kind of set. Since you've been implementing this with your teams, a lot of times school psychologists are like, is it mine yet? Right? Like, is this a
Yes,
special ed
yes.
issue? Right. But our knowledge about this information, it seems like as soon as we know about this or as soon as we start seeing some of these behaviors, that's when we want to start intervening
Yes.
and have people get involved. So, what are those kind of systems in place so that you're not the last to know about this situation?
That is such a crucial thought, because sometimes, of course, that happens with testing referrals and crises in other areas, and right, and we're expected to sort of pick up the pieces at the end, and at that point, it's 1,000 Legos all over the floor. Like,
Right.
what am I supposed to build out of this? Um, so yeah, I think good team communication is really crucial. I'm in a small building for part of my week, and then I do school neuropsych assessments for the rest of the week around my district. But um, within the couple days that I'm in that building, we try very hard to have a team meeting to share what's going on with any crises that I might not have been in the building for. Um, Upcoming potential referrals for assessment. And so we try to have that special ed team meeting where we're really sharing, here's, heads up, here's what's coming. And that, I think, it makes such a huge difference. It really makes me proud of my team in my building and grateful for them, because I couldn't do it without them. I would be lost. And the fact that they go out of their way to communicate to me is just, it's really kind and supportive of them. Um, and it also means that we don't end up in a parent meeting where we're all embarrassed because we didn't talk to each other, like, oh, wait, was I supposed to do that? And so I think we're all fairly experienced and feel like, oh yeah, we don't ever want to be there, and we want to uplift each other in our roles. Um, and and so really, we try to take that time to have a meeting every week or every other week to really talk about what's going on, and that allows us um, to go in and do an observation before we have a case conference with a teacher, or before we have a parent conference at a report card meeting where someone's asked us to jump into. I would much rather have eyes on the kiddo and maybe look through the file, look at their report card or something, prior to jumping into a meeting with parents where I may not be aware of what's going to happen or what people are looking for. So really just trying our best to have open communication. And of course, we're so busy that we will drop the ball from time to time, but really looking to one another as teammates to share and keep all of that open. And it goes for us as well. I often have special ed teachers who'll say, I know our meeting is next week and we haven't had a chance to talk, but I know you evaluated so and so. Can we talk about what that looks like and what you were seeing, and just really opening that level of communication up. And I think parents appreciate that too. It means we come into meetings more informed and
Mhm.
on the same page in most cases, and demonstrates that we have some competence and know what we're doing, which is really important. So
I know one of the things that I've shared before with my teams is, I'd rather you ask me whether or not I need to know about this and for me to triage it rather than to
yes,
you to triage, and I might be missing something. So I know it's hard. No school psychologist has ever thought, I wish I was on more email chains,
yes,
right? But the number of instances where I'm like, no, 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 that was one you should have told me about. And
yes, right,
right? Like, sometimes I'm just like, if when in doubt, just loop me in and I will let
yeah,
you know if I can be looped out, but I'd most of the time rather be looped in and just help triage. I've had
yeah,
instances where teachers are like, "I don't know if it was quite a parent request for assessment." I'm like, "What exactly did they say?"
yes,
Just and then I was like, "And when did this happen? 3 weeks ago? Awesome. All right, so we're past timelines. Great."
right,
Like, I just always told people, like, "When in doubt, just send me an email.
yes,
I will help triage this and whether or not." So, even when we have situations where it's not special ed yet, please loop me in because I can help and I want to be part of these processes because these school refusal issues can easily turn into special ed.
yes,
And if
yes.
we can prevent that from ever needing to happen, how amazing is that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was so well said. Yeah, loop me in and I'll tell you whether I need to be looped out or not. Yeah, that's great.
Well, this podcast is called the Prepared School Psych. When you think of that term prepared, what do you do to help yourself feel more prepared in your role?
Um, I I first of all, I just love that idea. I know I said that a little while ago. I love the topic, the title, because we need to be prepared, right? The education is busy. The demands for our time and the demands for our expertise are huge in this field, and so the more prepared we are, the more we'll be able to meet the challenges presented to us. Um, so I think a couple of things. Again, I go back to that. None of us is as skilled as all of us. I love to talk with school psychs, and I love my podcast that I'm a part of, as
Yeah.
well as yours and others, because I learned so much. So there's so much free information now as school psychologists and educators that we can join a podcast, join a community of practice, connect with our teams in our school district. We don't have to go about it alone, and join NASP. I know it's not cheap to join your state association and our national association if you're new and younger and lower on the salary scale, but it's so valuable. I
Mhm.
find I love reading the communique. I try to dive in right when I get it, and I bring it to work and I try to read it at lunch, and um, there's always something in there that I find, and then just being able to even look things up on NASP website. If I have a student who has a death in the family, I can't tell you how many times I've utilized the NASP web resources for grieving students or grieving families or grieving teachers.
Mhm.
Um, there's a wealth of information, and some of it's free. Even if you're not a NASP member, you can utilize a number of free resources as well. And if you are a consumer of research, you don't have to go through a paywall. You can email the authors, and most authors are allowed to share their articles with you. So it takes an extra step, but there's a lot of information available, and I would say, um, don't be discouraged if it seems like it's behind a paywall or it's expensive. There are free resources and so many places to network.
Yeah.
Take advantage of all of that.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing all these resources. I can't wait to see your 4-page document about school refusal, and I'm excited that we get to share that with everyone who is listening as well. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. We will also make sure to put a link to your state association. So if we have anyone listening from your area or anyone thinking of moving to your area and are interested in getting involved, that they know how to reach out and learn about, all the different things that you guys are providing there for your local school psychologist. So good luck. I am so excited
Thank you.
with your um this pursuit to try and get those paid internships. So
Thank
can't wait to hear
you.
about it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me, Jenny. I'm so grateful, and I love the work that you're doing. Keep up the great work, and look forward to maybe having you on School Psych podcast sometime as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. We'll see you all next time.